develop. There'll also be a fair bit of cloud across the Midlands, so any sunshine will be quite fleeting and it will be quite mild for early October with temperatures climbing into the high teens. Across the northeast of England, southerly winds will gradually pick up, and although it will stay dry, there will be a lot of cloud around during the middle part of the day. 1 or 2 bright spells are possible across the east and southeast of Scotland, but further west, wet and windy weather will be edging in from off the Atlantic. It'll be windy across Northern Ireland as well, with generally cloudy skies and some outbreaks of rain, most notably across western parts of the province where the rain could be heavy. So during the afternoon and evening, rain and strong winds will affect many northern and northwestern areas. Elsewhere, though, it should stay dry. And that's how your weather is shaping up for the rest of your Monday.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Happy Monday morning to you. Thank you for tuning in to GB News with me, Bev Turner, until midday. It is the Tory Party conference. We've got our team up there in Birmingham to bring us all the latest reaction to Kwasi Kwarteng reversing already on his budgetary tax cuts for the richest. Does this smack of weakness or an inability or an ability to listen? Make sure you let me know what you think at GBViews at gbnews.uk. We've also got teachers' strikes to discuss today. Don't even get me started on that. And today's health stories with Dr. Renee Hoodekamp in just a moment in the studio. But first, here are your very latest news headlines with Rosie.
A very good morning. It's just 1 minute past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Well, a government U-turn this morning. The new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, has abandoned plans to scrap the top rate of income tax for the highest earners. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have admitted the plan to abolish the 45p tax rate, only made public 10 days ago, has become a distraction from their mission to grow the economy. Liz Truss tweeted to say, "We get it and we've listened." It's after criticism from economists, several Conservative MPs and former cabinet ministers following a tumultuous week in the markets. The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Chris Philp, says the 45p tax cut was a small part of a huge package of measures.
The government is a government that listens. It's taken the temperature, and it's, we are a democracy, and we're a parliamentary democracy. So listening both to the public and, of course, to members of parliament is very important. That's what they've done. This had become a distraction from what is a really good plan. There are many bits of this plan that haven't even been reported in the last week and a half. What we now need to do is get on and implement it to make sure that people's wages can increase. And, of course, it contains tax cuts for everybody. It contains tax cuts for all 30 million of the United Kingdom's working people, which is really important.
Well, in response to the tax cut U-turn, the pound is bouncing back to levels seen before the announcement of that mini budget. Sterling surged during overnight trading as reports emerged of the Chancellor's plans to U-turn. The pound hit $1.13 at one stage, but has since dipped again to 1.12. The Northern Ireland Minister, Steve Baker, has apologised for what he called his ferocious stance during Brexit negotiations with the EU. The Conservative MP said he was sorry that he and his colleagues had not always acted in a way that encouraged Ireland and the EU to trust the UK. Well, he's now asking MPs to act with humility to restore relations with Ireland, admitting those relations are not where they should be. A 34-year-old man's due to appear at Liverpool Magistrates' Court later, charged with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman is accused of fatally shooting the 9-year-old inside her home in Liverpool in August. He's also charged with the attempted murder of her mother, who was injured in the incident. A second man, Paul Russell, is also due in court, charged with assisting an offender. Sarah Everard's killer, Wayne Couzens, will return to the Old Bailey today over flashing charges. The 49-year-old's accused of 2 counts of indecent exposure, predating Miss Everard's killing. In June 2015, he allegedly drove pantless through Dover in Kent. He's also accused of exposing himself to a female cyclist in November of 2020. Some international news now, and Brazil's presidential elections heading for a runoff vote after neither of the two candidates secured 50% in the first round. The incumbent president, Jair Bolsonaro, will face the former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who had been anticipated to win the first vote. Well, voters will now go to the polls again in 4 weeks' time. Ukraine's president says his forces have made advances in the south of the country, liberating a number of besieged cities in the Kherson region. Volodymyr Zelensky's comments come after the UK's defence secretary says it's highly unlikely that Vladimir Putin will use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, but warned that the Russian leader is not rational. Putin has previously warned the West that he'll use all means at his disposal if his country is threatened. Well, Major General Tim Cross doesn't think that the West should take Putin's threats lightly.
This guy has got the capability of causing serious strategic damage, not just through nuclear weapons. I mean, everybody's been talking about nuclear weapons, understandably, but he's also got chemical weapons and biological weapons. He's used both of those. He's used biological weapons against us in Salisbury, but more importantly, in one sense, he's used chemical weapons in places like Syria.
Authorities in Indonesia have launched an investigation after a deadly stampede at a football match over the weekend. The incident in East Java killed at least 125 people. 32 of them were children. Well, the crash happened after police tear-gassed fans who'd invaded the pitch. FIFA president called the incident a dark day for football. The King and Queen Consort are visiting Dunfermline in Fife to mark the former town gaining city status. It's their first joint public engagement since the period of royal mourning came to an end. Dunfermline is one of the 8 places that have won city status as part of the late monarch's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. You're now up to date on GB News, and I'll bring you more across the day as it happens. Now let's head to the point.
Very good morning to you. This is GB News with me, Bev Turner, on your TV, radio and online. We've got a great show lined up for you to kickstart not only the day but also your week. So here is what we've got on the menu. The lady is for turning. The government announces it is abandoning the planned abolition of the 45p rated tax after significant internal Tory opposition. What sort of signal does this set out? Are you one of the 40,000 people who took part in the London Marathon yesterday? If so, congratulations. I hope the blisters are okay. I want to hear what motivates you, as well as any tips you might have had. Keep those coming. How was the experience? GB Views at gbnews.uk. We're going to be talking to somebody who ran the marathon a little bit later. And the King and Queen consort will hold their first joint public engagement since royal mourning for the Queen ended. But why was King Charles asked not to attend the COP27 climate change summit? I'll be talking to our royal reporter Cameron Walker to find out what happened. We've got all of that coming up and much more across the programme. You can get in touch with your views. Please do. I will get to as many of them as I can. GB Views at gbnews.uk. But first of all, my views on how to treat children in Britain. So, in 1845, a British ship, HMS Birkenhead, named after the port in which she was built, crashed on rocks off the African coast. Only 193 of her 643, mainly military crew, survived. There were insufficient lifeboats, but Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Seton knew that rushing the lifeboats would leave the women and children to drown. He instructed his men to stand silent and orderly, and they obeyed. Now, all the women and children survived, and his command formed the basis of the women and children first ethos, which became the bedrock of Western civilization. We adults must always protect children, ours, and everybody else's. But in 2022, on dry land, it can be surprisingly hard to pinpoint political or social decisions which put kids front and centre. I don't mean mollycoddling, indulging and telling them they've got right. You can find a lot of that. I'm talking about opportunities for growth, good health, chances to build their inner confidence and self-belief. Frankly, opportunities to learn that life is tough, but they are tougher. The easiest place to start is education, of course. And yet, even after British schools endured longer COVID closures than any other European country bar Italy, we hear this weekend that hundreds of thousands of teachers are considering striking this winter. During the shamdemic, most children missed over half a year of in-person schooling, with the poorest at the most underperforming schools suffering the worst. When some of us questioned the cruelty of this policy, we were told that protecting the elderly from ill health was more important than giving children a school life and all that that encompasses: friendships, routine, hot meals, socialisation, sport, and so on. I'm yet to meet an octogenarian who even supported that idea at the time. Furthermore, for the first time in history, a drug was then offered to children in the form of an injection, not for their own protection, as they were at a statistically tiny risk from COVID, but to protect the old and vulnerable in society. This subverted the tradition of putting kids first, and at that moment, I knew that humanity had entered a troubling new phase. Adults were prepared to use healthy children as a shield to protect themselves. The Us For Them organisation, who campaign for the well-being of children to be a guiding principle of public policy, say that lockdown consequences will live with some kids for life and extend far beyond educational attainment. They remind us that 100,000 children never even returned to the school system. They just disappeared from attendance registers up and down the country, and not one politician seems to care. Astonishingly, when the government announced that it would hold a COVID-19 inquiry to assess the measures taken, they didn't include any ambition to research the effects on kids. Eventually, under public pressure, they had to concede that taping off swing parks, telling children they could kill granny, enforcing long periods of screen time indoors and forcing them to cover their faces with masks in classrooms might just have taken a toll, which requires a little consideration. And I know that life can feel tough for us adults right now, and at today's party conference, talk will be of bankers' bonuses and homeowner costs. But spare a thought for the young. Public transport strikes disproportionately affect teenagers whose development and happiness relies on being able to get to college or meet up with friends, and they can almost never afford taxis or have their own cars. Food price hikes are brutal for the teenager treating themselves with money from a Saturday job. And yet, on the other side of this neglect is the paradox that too many adults cannot wait to label, pathologise and medicate young people for a whole manner of what used to be considered normal personality or emotional states. A cultural fixation on the mental health of children without any attempts to provide proven mitigating measures such as cheap and available sports facilities, youth clubs, music groups, or other vital social settings, which means that we are spectacularly failing our youth. Record numbers of children, including some of primary school age, are on medical antidepressants. Just think about that. I'll finish with another maritime tale. In 1884, 3 British men and a young cabin boy were charged with the task of delivering a yacht, the Mignonette, to Australia. But roughly 3 months after leaving from Southampton, high winds sank the vessel off the coast of Africa, leaving the crew in a tiny wooden dinghy without provisions. The adults decided to kill the cabin boy and eat him to survive. 4 days later, when they were rescued by a passing boat, they naively thought their plight would be understood and took the boy's body back for a Christian burial. They were eventually found guilty of murder. So in that instance, right and just morality did prevail. But let's hope that today's adults in positions of power will become more like the crew of HMS Birkenhead than that of the ill-fated Mignonette, because only in that case will we give our kids a fighting chance of a better future. So let me know what you think. Do you agree with me? GBviews at gbnews.uk. Right, moving on to the Tory party conference now. Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng is set to perform, he's already done it, a screeching U-turn, and will now abolish, he's going to get rid of this planned 45p rate of income tax. So the Chancellor will give a much-anticipated speech at the Conservative Party conference later today, addressing the fallout from his controversial mini-budget last week. So joining us now to give us a bit more detail is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Good morning, Tom. It is a terrible start for the Tory party conference, isn't it, this? I mean, they're dressing it up as, well, look, we are the party who listens, we aren't afraid to change our minds. But there'll be a lot of people to say, well, surely you listened to other people in the first place before you made this decision. What happened? Who did you listen to? And why this U-turn already?
It's a complete rebranding of this government who was trying to predicate itself upon this notion that it wouldn't be for turning, that it would stay the course, that it would make the tough decisions, that it was willing to be unpopular for the sake of that prize of economic growth. Well, that is a much harder argument to make today after what took place in the very early hours of this morning. Yesterday afternoon, a press release was sent out to us journalists saying that the Chancellor today in his big set-piece speech will say now is the time to stay the course, to make sure that that package that was announced just over a week ago is delivered. And only a couple of hours after that embargo was lifted, it emerged that precisely the opposite is taking place. Late-night discussions between the Chancellor and the Prime Minister ended with the widespread reports, followed by the confirmation early this morning of that scrapping of the plan to abolish the additional rate of tax. It's worth rowing back here and looking at the context. The Chancellor announced this as a bit of a rabbit out of the hat last Friday, or the Friday before last, in this mini-budget, saying that this is a way to generate more growth, that this is actually taking the top tax rate back to where it was when the Labour Party was last in power, and indeed attracting greater investment into the United Kingdom. By some estimates, this was a move that could have even been revenue neutral. Because of the extra economic activity generated, the tax cut may not have cost any money at all. And yet, despite that, despite the fundamentals, despite even the comparison to where the tax rate was sat under the last Labour government, this clearly fell apart after opposition from some corners of the media and from Conservative members of Parliament. We talk a lot about the large Tory majority in Parliament, and large though it is, it only takes 35 members of Parliament, 35 Conservative members of Parliament, to vote against their own party to undo that large majority. And it seems clear that the Chief Whip calculated last night that perhaps those in opposition to the 45p reduction measure had the numbers. We, of course, heard some pretty strident criticism from big beasts like Michael Gove. No doubt people like Rishi Sunak would have been opposed as well. We heard criticism from Grant Shapps yesterday. We heard a lot of criticism coming from many corners, and it does seem like this is simply a fight that the government did not want to have. The big question now is, what does that mean for the rest of their programme? Does this mean that, as they say, they'll get on and deliver the rest of their big reforms? Or does it mean that this is simply the start of more to come, that they don't have the fight in them?
OK, thank you very much, Tom. Tom, there at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, and we will be hearing from Tom all week, actually, and certainly throughout the rest of today. So to consider this bit a little bit more, I'm joined now by Anne Widdecombe, former Conservative Minister. Good morning, Anne. We heard from Tom there that it seems like this U-turn was inspired by a hostile media and perhaps a few angry backbenchers. Is that your take on it? And if so, that's quite worrying, isn't it, in terms of leadership that we can rely upon?
It's extremely worrying. I mean, you haven't got leadership. What you've got is a bunch of headless chickens running round, talking tough, talking Thatcher, talking Churchill, acting the grand old Duke of York, and just reversing their position. Now, that tax cut at absolutely most, was going to cost $2 billion. At best, it was going to raise money, and it might have just been neutral. Compare that to the $150 billion that's gone on the energy cap, and you see how trivial it actually was. And really, they should have just stuck to the course, particularly after briefing that they were going to stick to the course. And really, this is an extremely worrying sign of, whether or not Britain is in safe hands. It's in very, very pusillanimous hands.
Who do you think they thought this U-turn would win over, Anne? That's what I'm baffled by, because if you are one of those people who is planning to vote Labour, which has given the Labour a 30-point lead at the moment in the polls, this isn't going to convince you that the Tories are on your side. And if you are a high rate of taxpayer who suddenly felt that this is the Conservatives you know and love, you're now disappointed as well. So I can't work out who they think this appeals to.
Well, the answer to that is nobody. I expect what they were worried about, and this is guesswork, I don't know, but I strongly suspect they were worried about the path that the conference might take, about an awful lot of division being displayed, and decided that the easiest way to buy that off was to get rid of what everybody was focused on. I still don't understand why, which was the upper rate tax. And I suspect that was their reasoning. I doubt very much if even the most optimistic of them thinks that it's going to win them any votes.
Really isn't. I think also what I suspect they've misunderstood, Anne, is that Kwasi Kwarteng has said this is a distraction. I'm not quite sure what he means by that, because it totally contradicts what Liz Truss was saying last week about the fact that she will make tough decisions, even if they aren't popular. And that resonated as a sound of leadership that a lot of people were reassured by. We thought, OK, let's just give her a chance. I quite like the idea of sort of a tough love approach. But actually, I think the policy in terms of this budget, which upset people the most, was the bankers' bonuses being uncapped. That is perhaps, if they did want to make a statement about not being on the side of the uber-rich, that is perhaps the one they could have reneged on.
It would have been vastly more costly to do so, not only in terms of money, but in terms of policy. I mean, the policy is to get Britain competitive, to make the maximum of EU freedoms, to attract investment, and the bankers, the abolition of the cap, which does apply throughout the EU, but wouldn't apply to us now. The abolition of that cap was a sign that we're going to be competitive. We're going to be, if you like, Singapore on Thames, where we're going to give the EU a run for its money. And all I can say is the EU, and indeed Keir Starmer over here, must be laughing themselves silly at the moment. But that is the reason why they've gone for the 45p rather than the banker's cap, which was the more important move.
Got it, understood. Now, Michael Gove and Grant Shapps are apparently behind the scenes. Well, not even behind the scenes. They've been quite honest about the fact that they're heading up this rebellion. You've got an idea of what these two characters are like. How dangerous might they be for Liz Truss?
Michael Gove is extremely dangerous. He spends all his time conspiring and plotting. I mean, I know this man. I've known him for years. Ironically, he was a very, very good minister. He was good in education. He was good in justice. Didn't have very long in either, but he was good. But what he is not is a good colleague. He is not loyal, and he gets bees in his bonnet, and then he will do whatever he can to destroy the people in his path. He did it with Boris. He's done it numerous times behind the scenes in briefing against people. He is a plotter. He is just a natural plotter. Can't help himself.
What can she do about him? Is there anything she can do?
Well, the extreme, of course, would be to withdraw the whip, but given that she's given in to him and abolish the top rate of tax, and abolish the abolition of the top rate of tax, the fact that she's given in to him would make it now look very odd if she punished him for bringing that about. So I don't really know that she can do much. I mean, the problem facing any Conservative leader at the moment, it faced Boris, it's faced them all for some time, is that the Conservative Parliamentary Party is an undisciplined rabble. Until that, somebody gets on top of that, and that is the Chief Whip's job, I'm afraid there's very little that a Prime Minister can do. And a party which is taking Britain on a new course, like it did under Thatcher, needs, crucially, discipline. I can remember when we used to say in the Tory party in Parliament, oh, if the Chief Whip tells us to jump out of the window, we form an orderly queue in order to do so.
Amazing, isn't it? Right, Anne, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot of you this week as the Tory party conference continues, and we'll get your very commonsensical take on everything when we can. Thank you so much. Now, after this quick break, I'm going to be joined in the studio by GP René Hundekamp to talk all things health, such as should Asda be offering you money to take a flu vaccine? Let me know what you think about that after this quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it is 10:26. You are watching Bev Turner on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning. Now, I'm delighted to say we're going to do a little section on big health stories in the news today, because the first hearing of the UK's official COVID inquiry is set to commence tomorrow. The inquiry will examine and report on preparations and the response to the pandemic across the United Kingdom. However, there's already some controversy as The Observer reports that bereaved families have been barred from submitting individual testimony. So, Renee Hoendekamp is here with me in the studio. Let's have a little chat about this, Renee. These are obviously bereaved families, devastated to have lost people due to COVID.
Yes.
And now we've got this investigation to see what happened. Now, why aren't they being listened to?
I don't know. I mean, I think everything about this inquiry has been thrown together quickly. None of us truly know exactly what they're going to cover, what they're not going to cover. It seems to me that they're probably taking the view that there are, quite a lot of families here, over 100,000 families. It's going to be a massive amount of testimony because people do want to talk about what killed their loved one. Of course they do. And so they're probably thinking that it's too much volume and it's the wrong venue for that to happen. But, these people do have to be listened to. And I do wonder if this COVID inquiry needs to actually look at its remit and us as the public have some sort of input into what it is they cover.
What kind of complaints will family members have, do you think?
So I think the biggest complaints are going to be from the elderly, who were denied hospital admission even. They weren't even taken to hospital from their care homes, and I saw that. I saw perfectly well people who, because they were 75, 80 and in a care home, didn't even get taken to hospital when they had COVID. And I had arguments with doctors over it. I wrote about this in July of 2020 because they were talking to me like I was a lunatic, saying, well, why would you put a 80-year-old on a ventilator? And I said, but they might not need a ventilator. They might just need a bit of oxygen.
Yeah.
So I think there'll be lots of that from care homes.
Gosh.
There'll be people of parents of children who had comorbidities, had Down syndrome, had genetic disorders, who didn't get beds because people were prioritised. Now, don't get me wrong, Bev. ITU beds are prioritised every single day of the year and people probably don't know that.
Yeah.
I have been that doctor fighting for my patient to get a bed who didn't get one. So it happens. But it's how it happened.
Yeah.
I think it all comes back to transparency, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? I think they're saying that these families will, this investigation is being headed up by Lady Hallett, she's the inquiry chair, and that family members, rather than submitting long testimony, will get to basically write a pen portrait, is how they're describing it, to a private research company as part of a parallel listening project.
It's almost like an art installation,
Isn't
it?
it?
Yeah, that's what it feels like to me, that.
It feels like theatre were part of the COVID theatre, and so it continues. Right, moving on. Now, I don't know about you, Renee, but when I go to the supermarket, you know what I want? I want food. I don't necessarily I want some cleaning products. Occasionally I might want a bottle of wine.
And for it to be over quickly.
To confess that to a doctor. But Asda are now giving away what? Tell our viewers what they're doing.
Yeah, they're giving away vouchers to people who book a vaccine from them and pay for it, of course. These vaccines for the people that are getting vouchers are not free. They're $9.98, which I believe is quite cheap.
Yeah.
However, I am absolutely horrified by this as a doctor. And it's part of the reason I've been horrified by this coercive approach that we seem to be developing in the UK. We're not going to tell you about the medication that we give you in any great detail, but we're going to give you a reward if you have it.
Yeah.
We saw it with kids. If you want to go to the nightclub, come and have a COVID vaccine. If you want to go to university, come and have a COVID vaccine. If you want to go shopping and get a discount, come and have a flu jab. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't have a flu jab.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is they should have a flu jab for the right reasons. And I'm astounded that once again, we have something like a supermarket lining the pockets of the pharma companies by coercing people into a medication.
Yeah. And there'll be people watching who go, well, I don't get it. Why is that a problem? Surely it's a win-win. The customer gets a little bit more money to spend in Asda, the drug company gets their profits, they might get protected from the flu jab as well. Why is it a problem?
Because the lines are too blurred. Lines between taking medication should never be blurred. You should know that you need that medication because of what you've got going on. You should know what's good about that medication, and you should also know what's bad about that medication. There are always bad things about medication. Yeah. Do people know that 1 in a million people who have a flu jab get Guillain-Barré when they get their voucher from Asda? I doubt it. No. And that's what worries me about it. It's coercive.
Yeah, it is. And I'm like you, I'm a big believer in a fully informed consent with any medical procedure or drug that you have. At least you know what your risk benefit might be. Right. Obesity. I mean, we could sit here for 2 hours and discuss the problem this causes the NHS every year. 70 health organisations have urged Liz Truss not to abandon anti-obesity measures.
But it looks like they probably are going to abandon them. And I know, look, I'm a free market woman. I believe that people should make their own decisions about life. I do, however, believe on obesity that we live in an obesogenic society. There is good science to show that when a supermarket encourages you to buy 2 and get 1 free, it changes your behaviour. So my view on this is, in that case, let's change people's behaviour for the positive.
Yeah.
We get 64,000 people a year in the UK die from obesity-related disease. It costs the NHS alone £6 billion directly to treat obesity, but another £58 billion to treat all of the periphery and the damage to society. Now, I don't think stopping people getting 1 and buying 1 free, why don't we do that on lettuce, for example, or avocado? I don't think that's the whole answer, but I certainly don't think we should be scrapping this. I think we need to go back to basics. We need to look at education, what children learn about food, but we also need to stop encouraging people to make unhealthy choices.
Why is there such reluctance on the part of various governments, do you think, over the years to truly clamp down on this? I mean, as we saw in the last 2 years, they weren't afraid to get involved in the minutiae of our lives when it involved a virus, but they don't seem to ever be particularly willing to mess around with people's supermarket trolleys.
Do you know what I think? I think it's bigger than that. I actually think that obesity has become that hot potato, like the NHS and reforming it has. And I think the moment you say anything about obesity, you get called, you know, fattest, that people can't help it, that it's not within their control. We have normalised obesity. 60% of the UK population is overweight. 60%. So those people don't want to talk about it. You know, so we're not allowed to either, but we have to. This is a tsunami. It's the biggest issue that the NHS faces.
Yeah, we were already in an obesity pandemic before COVID came along.
Absolutely.
Renee, lovely. We've raced through them. Thank you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Bev.
OK, right. After this quick break, are you one of the 40,000 people who took part in yesterday's London Marathon? If so, I want to hear from you. How was it? GBviews at gbnews.uk. I'm going to be talking about what might motivate somebody to do that. You're nutters. But before that, a look at this morning's news.
Very good morning. It's 10:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. A government U-turn this morning. The new Chancellor's abandoned plans to scrap the top rate of income tax for the highest earners. The Prime Minister and Kwasi Kwarteng have admitted the plan to abolish the 45p tax rate that was only made public 10 days ago. That plan's become a distraction, they say, from their mission to grow the economy. Well, both Liz Truss and Mr Kwarteng say we get it and we've listened. It's after criticism from economists, several Conservative MPs and former cabinet ministers following a tumultuous week in the markets. Well, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Chris Philp, told us the 45p tax cut was a small part of a huge package of measures.
The government is a government that listens. It's taken the temperature, and it's, we are a democracy, and we're a parliamentary democracy. So listening both to the public and, of course, to members of Parliament is very important. That's what they've done. This had become a distraction from what is a really good plan. There are many bits of this plan that haven't even been reported in the last week and a half.
Well, in response to the tax cut U-turn, the pound's bouncing back to levels seen before the announcement of the mini-budget. Sterling surged during overnight trading as reports emerged of the Chancellor's plans for that U-turn. The pound hit $1.13 at one stage. It's now since dipped again to 1.12. Almost £150 million will be taken off customers' water bills after 11 water companies received financial penalties. It's the water regulator Ofwat say that utility companies have been fined for missing targets. Thames Water and Southern Water performed the worst. They'll have to return almost £80 million to their clients. Customers could see their bills reduced in 2023 or 2024. The King and Queen consort are visiting Dunfermline in Fife to mark the former town gaining city status. It'll be their first joint public engagement since the royal mourning period ended. Dunfermline is one of the 8 places that won city status as part of the late monarch's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it is 10:38 on a Monday. You are watching and listening to GB News with me, Bev Turner. We are live on your TV, online and radio this morning. Now, a 34-year-old man has appeared at Liverpool Magistrates Court charged with the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, and the case has been sent to Liverpool Crown Court, where it will be heard later today. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper was in court and can tell us a bit more now. Good morning, Sophie. What did we hear this morning?
Well, good morning to you. Well, we've just come out of Magistrates Court here in Liverpool, where we've just heard the first hearings for the two men who've been charged in relation to the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. We heard the hearing for Thomas Cashman, a 34-year-old from West Derby, who's been charged with Olivia's murder. He's also been charged with the attempted murder of convicted burglar Joseph Nee and Olivia's mother, Cheryl, who was in the room for the hearing and looked visibly upset throughout. Cashman's also been charged with 2 counts of possession of a firearm. Now, we will see Cashman later today, in fact, at Liverpool Crown Court, where his trial will begin in earnest, and that he will not be able to have any kind of bail due to him being accused of murder. Now, we also heard the first hearing for Paul Russell, the 40-year-old from West Derby, who's been accused and charged with assisting an offender. We heard that he drove Thomas Cashman away from the scene after the shooting, and he also disposed of Cashman's clothing that he was wearing whilst he carried out the shooting. Now, the defence made no application for the bail of Paul Russell, and he will remain remanded in custody ahead of his trial, which has been set for the 31st of October.
OK, thank you very much, Sophie. Right, views. Thank you, Sophie. Right, you've been getting in touch with your views, as I asked you to do, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and a lot of you are, like me, kind of a bit baffled about this U-turn from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng so early on. Peter says, I get the backlash, but if they want to save face, let's look at what can be done. Cut all the green taxes on fuel and household fuel and cut VAT on all fuel types. We left the EU with a promise to diverge from the EU, especially on VAT, but as yet nothing has been done. This is one question I've been asking, and maybe they will reserve it for the main budget, but it would have been so easy to cut VAT to help people in the hospitality industry. And I kind of think VAT is one of those taxes which everybody benefits from. It's It's not as divisive as these tax rates on income. Wendy said, I'd like to see the green tax reduced or scrapped altogether, but there's been no mention of that either from the government or the media. Good point. Liz Truss did say that she was going to reduce those taxes, and then she's kind of gone a bit quiet on that. We will get, no doubt, some elucidation on that this week at the Tory Party conference. And Eddie has said, in abolishing the 45p announcement, Liz has done a U-turn. Her policy was one of growth. Bailing out taxpayers with taxpayers' money for energy bills will not generate growth. In fact, few of her measures will. The top rate of tax deduction, whether or not we agree with it, was the only growth-laden policy in the budget, and that has now been ditched. It certainly has, and it's leaving quite a few of us a bit concerned about what they represent and what they stand for. So, very strange. Anyway, right, keep your views coming, won't you, on that as well. And I also want to hear from you if you ran the marathon yesterday. How are the blisters? How are the sore legs? How much money did you make on the charity? Was it as bad as it looks? Let me know, gbviews@gbnews.uk. OK, now one of the last surviving links to the Great Escape has died, aged 102. Captain Charles Vivian Howard was a Royal Navy pilot and became a prisoner of war at the camp made famous by the 1963 film The Great Escape. Tasked with the important responsibility of distracting the guards using his fluent German, he helped 76 men escape via secret tunnels. But Vivian remained at the camp for 2.5 more years. His son spoke to our reporter Ellie Costello about his father's life.
Vivian Howard's life was nothing short of remarkable. When war broke out in 1939, 19-year-old Vivian volunteered to join the Royal Navy as a pilot. In 1941, his plane was shot down. He was captured and held at the German Stalag Luft 3 camp in modern-day Poland.
I have had the pleasure of knowing quite a number of British...
The camp was made famous as the location of the Great Escape.
There were 3 tunnels that were called Tom, Dick and Harry. The tunnel called Tom started in Dad's hut, which was the Polish hut. He elected to go in with the Poles and he learned Polish. And then they discovered that one, but there were 2 others. Or 76, I think it was, escaped. His job in that was to, because he was fluent in German, was to distract the guards and converse with them. But he wasn't one of the escapees, luckily, because Hitler had 50 of them executed. You know, he just got on with things at the time. They were all in it together. I mean, the film The Great Escape was not entirely accurate. There were no Americans involved in it.
Out. What are you doing over here by the wire?
Well, like I told Max here, I was trying to get my gun.
They felt it was their duty to escape, to take up the time of Germans, the enemy.
Towards the war's end, Vivian survived the death marches when prison camps in eastern Germany were emptied as the Red Army advanced.
Dad told me there was a chance remark from a Polish colleague, which probably saved his life. They said, look, when you're on a march like this, never take your boots off, because your feet will swell and you never get them back on again. And if you couldn't walk or keep up, they would shoot you. So they said, loosen them, but don't take them off. And that probably saved his life.
Vivian ended up in a camp in Germany, which was liberated when the war ended. He went on to have 3 children with his wife, Bernadette, and died at the age of 102 on the 14th of September, 2022.
He was a friend and a supporter. He taught me how to do cryptic crosswords, and we used to do a lot of that together, and that was great fun. I used to really enjoy that. So a supportive and kind man who taught me a lot. And I think it was, you know, a good life well lived. So he had a good life, and I remember the good times.
Captain Charles Vivian Howard will be remembered for his remarkable life and his great sacrifice for freedom. Ellie Costello, GB News.
Lovely story. Thank you, Ellie. Now, what is your idea of the perfect Sunday. For 40,000 people, the answer yesterday was running 26.2 miles of the capital city as part of the London Marathon. So a big congratulations to anybody who achieved that yesterday. All of our viewers and listeners who took part, let me know how it was. But what motivates someone to stick at the training for all that, which takes months of physical activity and discipline? I'm delighted to join now by Amy Hughes, a runner who has run plenty of marathons, to tell us about her experience. You didn't run yesterday, did you, Amy? I think your website describes you as running a bit and mumming a bit. But you didn't run the London Marathon yesterday.
No, I didn't run yesterday, and I had major jealousy. I was literally looking at everyone and wishing I was there. The London Marathon is just the best race ever. But yeah, not this year, maybe next year.
Why not this year, Amy?
I've actually, so last year I had a baby, so I took a little bit of time off. And then I did my first ultra this year. So a couple of weeks ago, I ran 100k. So that was kind of my big thing this year. So a little bit different to what I normally do. Marathon's normally my distance, but yeah, I thought I'd give 100k a go. So, and I loved it, actually.
Take you to do 100k. Can you tell us what that is in miles as well, Amy, for those of us listening who don't really think in kilometres yet?
Yeah, so 100k is 62 miles.
And how long did that take you?
It was 15 hours, 52 minutes to be exact. Yeah, and I completely underestimated the hills. It was in the South Downs, so middle of nowhere, really hilly along the White Cliffs. But yeah, it was amazing. And I thought my feet were going to be blistered to death, but actually I got away with just one blister, so I was quite happy with that.
So tell us about the London Marathon. We're looking at some pictures here. As a spectator, you can sit there thinking, well, I'm full of admiration for what it is that you're doing, but I wouldn't particularly want to do it myself. And particularly the training involved, because it's not something you can just rock up on the Sunday morning and have a go at, can you?
No, not at all. I always say this, I always think race day is actually just the icing on the cake. Like, that's the best thing about training for the marathon. Like, you've got the supporters, the atmosphere is amazing. You're finally done, you can go out and celebrate, but the training is the actual hard bit. And I think no matter what, the training's hard, but actually it'd be interesting to see what people think, because it always used to be in April before COVID, but now it's on October. So I guess most people have been training through the summer months. So I don't know if they found that better, because normally with it being in April, you have to train through the horrible weather, the dark mornings, the rain. So yeah, it's tough. It takes a lot of time. It's a lot of time dedicated to training.
Absolutely, and dedicating to fundraising. Lots of money raised for charity yesterday. Amy, I'm going to have to say goodbye to you because we're going up to the Tory Party conference now, but thank you very much for joining me, and do let us know when you run your next 1,000 kilometres or whatever it is, 100 kilometres or your next marathon. Let us know how it is. Amy Hughes there. Runner extraordinaire. OK, we are heading back up to Birmingham and the Conservative Party conference to talk to Brendan Clark-Smith, the Conservative MP for Bassett Law. Good morning, Brendan. How is it there this morning? Very simply, is it a good atmosphere? Is everybody excited? Or are you feeling like there's a little bit of explaining to do after events of the last 24 hours?
It is a good atmosphere, and yes, okay, we have had a big announcement, but I think it's worth bearing in mind that about 95% of what we were looking to before has been kept. I think it's enabled us to move on really and focus on other things, and I think as the PM and the Chancellor have both said, really, there was a distraction we maybe didn't need, so can focus on the tax cuts we've actually given to everybody else, a lot of the other good stuff we've done, like the energy price guarantee, and what we're going to do to grow our economy.
A distraction we didn't need. That's a very vague phrase. Can you help us understand what they mean?
Well, I think certainly with the 45p tax, people were talking about that. We were looking at it at promoting growth, and now, me as a Conservative, for example, I love the idea of a low state, people keeping more of the money in their pockets and so on, and of course we do want low taxes, but you've also got to bring people with you, you've got to do it at the right time, and we just felt that really it was, again, distracting people from actually all the other good stuff that we're actually doing that we want to be talking about at party conference as well. And the Chancellor said that he's listened to colleagues. Some of them had raised concerns about it, and he said, well, I'm going to change. So I think that's a sign of a good, pragmatic Chancellor who's prepared to listen to people and adapt when he needs to.
I think it's the sound of a chancellor who will blow with the wind, and it certainly seems to be in opposition to Liz Truss's message last week, which was, I will make unpopular decisions whether you like it or not. And then suddenly, the press didn't like it, it seems. A lot of backbench MPs didn't like it. And so Kwasi Kwarteng changed his mind, saying he listened to people, but presumably he listened to people before he made the decision in the first place.
Yeah, I think also it's worth looking at some of the other things in the programme. Now, the national insurance cut, if you remember when national insurance was raised originally, we were criticised by the Labour Party for that, saying how terrible it is, taking money away from working families. We reversed that and changed that, and now they're asking where do you get the money from, or they're complaining about that as well. So I think you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't in that sense. But we think it's about a bigger package. You remember it's over £100 billion, the energy price guarantee, the NI cut, the income tax cut, the stuff we've done on stamp duty, lots and lots of things there. And again, that's about 95% of the announcements that we made. So just for the sake of that 5%, really, we listen to colleagues, we want to focus on that instead. And again, really, I think we want a party that can come together. Prime Minister said about unity, that's a really, really big thing for us to do. I think after the turmoil we had before, we've had a difficult few weeks with what happened to Her Majesty. It's the party conference season, we want to be constructive.
Honestly, I cannot tell you how badly this U-turn is going down with the public this morning. I don't know how either Liz Truss or Kwasi Kwarteng and the likes of yourself are going to style it out for the next week, because all that's done now is handed the press a massive stick to continue to beat you with on the suggestion that any policy that's made can't be trusted, because if the public don't like it, you'll just change it again, and that means we don't know where we stand.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is important to make those difficult decisions. I think with this on reflection, looking at it again, it's about bringing people with you. A lot of members of the public, a lot of my constituents had actually said to me they didn't feel it was the right time to bring in this cut. They're quite happy with the cut that we had across the board, but at the same time they thought maybe the top end it wasn't the right time to do it. Now, of course, there is some precedence for this. When we knocked it down from 50 to 45, we found that the tax intake actually went up. And what we do want to do is we want people to be paying their fair share of tax, because, of course, that's what's going to pay for the schools, that's what's going to pay for the hospitals. But just on this occasion, it probably was not the right time to bring it in at the moment, and that's why we want to look at the other stuff and the positives instead.
Well, you've done a very good job to try and defend them, but I think it is still going to be quite difficult. You've got Michael Gove and Grant Shapps plotting and backstabbing already. The public do not like that. What is the mood down there, up there, at the Tory party conference in terms of those assassins in the background and what they might be up to?
Well, I think it's very important to listen to colleagues' concerns, and of course, sometimes you're not going to have a policy that's popular with everybody. We do have that 80-seat majority, but there's never really been a case of people piling in saying that we don't want this, we don't want that. It's been a constructive discussion. People have listened to it, and I respect what colleagues have said. Sometimes we may disagree, but we want to move in the same direction. We want growth. We want a Conservative majority government again at the next election. The only way we're going to do that is if we unite as a party. We want a positive vibe here at conference, and that's what I'm feeling today.
So does Liz Truss continue to have your complete backing? If Michael Gove takes you to one side this week and says, come here, Brendan, I want a word with you, I'm cooking something up, are you going to tell him to jog on, or are you going to have a conversation with him?
Yeah, it's probably a little unfair on Michael. I'm not quite sure he's doing that, but I'm a huge supporter of the Prime Minister. I backed her from the first round of the leadership contest. Really love what she wants to do with the country. I like what her vision is for that. And she's someone who can work on those details. She's got that history of delivery. I think we need to give her the chance, and we need to give her the backing to actually do that. So certainly got my full support, and I'm looking forward to seeing that economy growing, Bev.
All right, listen, have a lovely week. It's really nice to talk to you. Brendan Clark-Smith there, Conservative MP for Bassett Law, doing what a lot of MPs are going to have to do this week, Conservative MPs, which is basically just to defend. And it's not a good position to be in when you start a political party conference and you're on the back foot and you're having to defend the decisions that your leaders have been making. it's a terrible position for them to start in. Much better to be bragging about something that's gone down well rather than defending something that you've already mucked up. Tom has said it's amazing how vocal ex-ministers are and how quick they are to criticise. Apparently loyalty is a flexible concept only to be exercised when in office they suddenly find their voices on the backbenches, which should be renamed Backstabbers Row. And Michael has said the Conservatives are a party riven with factions and self-interest, which overrides the national interest if an election is held anytime soon. And nobody stood against the Conservative candidates, they would still lose. Thank you, Michael. And Sue has said, Liz Truss is the leader and should be very wary of believing Boris's backstabbers. You see, the shadow and the ghost of Boris Johnson still hangs over this, doesn't it, for a lot of people who support the Conservative Party. They connived for their own means. Sunak, Gove and a few at the top showed their true colours before Brexit even started. And they want Liz out now by falsely pretending they are there to help, but they are sharpening the knives again. We just want a period, don't we, of calm, continuous, reliable, secure government. It feels like a lot to ask for these days, doesn't it? Keep all your thoughts coming, won't you? Email me gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'm going to be back with more of today's top stories, including some royal information, plenty of your views as well after this quick break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Monday morning to you. Thank you for tuning in to GB News with me, Bev Turner, until midday. It is the Tory party conference, of course. We've got our team up there in Birmingham to bring us all the latest reaction to Kwasi Kwarteng reversing on his budgetary tax cuts for the richest. Does this smack of weakness or an ability to listen? Make sure you get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We've also got teaching strikes. Don't get me started on that. And I'll be talking to a Russian doctor who has fled the country after being conscripted to fight. But first, here's your very latest news with Rosie.
A very good morning. It's 11 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. A government U-turn this morning. The new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, has abandoned plans to scrap the top rate of income tax for the highest earners. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have admitted the plan to abolish the 45p tax rate, only made public 10 days ago, has become a distraction from their mission to grow the economy. Well, they both tweeted to say, "We get it and we've listened." It's after significant criticism from economists, several Conservative MPs and former cabinet ministers following a tumultuous week in the markets. Well, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Chris Philp, told us that the 45p tax cut was a small part of a huge package of measures.
The government is a government that listens. It's taken the temperature, and it's, we are a democracy, and we're a parliamentary democracy. So listening both to the public and, of course, to members of parliament is very important. That's what they've done. This had become a distraction from what is a really good plan. There are many bits of this plan that haven't even been reported in the last week and a half. What we now need to do is get on and implement it to make sure that people's wages can increase. And, of course, it contains tax cuts for everybody. It contains tax cuts for all 30 million of the United Kingdom's working people, which is really important.
The pound is bouncing back to levels seen before the announcement of the mini-budget. Sterling surged during overnight trading as reports emerged of the Chancellor's plans for a U-turn. Well, the pound hit $1.13 at one stage, but has now since dipped again to 1.12. The Northern Ireland Minister, Steve Baker, has apologised for what he called his ferocious stance during Brexit negotiations with the EU. The Conservative MP said he was sorry that he and his colleagues had not always acted in a way that encouraged Ireland and the EU to trust the UK. Well, he's asking MPs now to act with humility to restore relations with Ireland, admitting they're not where they should be. A 34-year-old man's appeared at Liverpool Magistrates' Court charged with the murder of Olivia Pratt-Corbell. Thomas Cashman is accused of fatally shooting the 9-year-old inside her home in Liverpool in August. He'll now appear at Liverpool Crown Court later this afternoon. He's also charged with the attempted murder of her mother, who was injured in the incident. To international news now. Brazil's presidential elections heading for a runoff vote after neither of the two candidates secured 50% in the first round. The incumbent President Jair Bolsonaro will face the former president of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who had been anticipated to win the first vote. Voters will go to the polls in 4 weeks' time to vote again. Ukraine's president says his forces have made advances in the south of the country and say they've liberated a number of besieged cities in the Kherson region. Volodymyr Zelensky's comments come after the UK's defence secretary says it's highly unlikely that Vladimir Putin will use nuclear weapons in Ukraine, but warned the Russian leader's not rational. Putin has previously warned the West he'll use all means at his disposal if his country's threatened. Well, Major General Tim Cross told us he doesn't think that the West should take Putin's threats lightly.
This guy has got the capability of causing serious strategic damage, not just through nuclear weapons. I mean, everybody's been talking about nuclear weapons, understandably, but he's also got chemical weapons and biological weapons. He's used both of those. He's used biological weapons against us in Salisbury, but more importantly, in one sense, he's used chemical weapons in places like Syria.
Authorities in Indonesia have launched an investigation after a deadly stampede at a football match on Saturday. The incident in East Java killed at least 125 people. 32 were children. The crash happened after police tear-gassed fans who'd invaded the pitch. FIFA president has called the incident a dark day for football. The King and Queen Consort are visiting Dunfermline in Fife to mark the former town gaining city status. It's their first joint public engagement since the period of royal mourning came to an end. Dunfermline is one of the 8 places that have won city status as part of the late monarch's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. We are now up to date on GB News, and I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's return to the point.
Good morning. Thank you for joining me, Bev Turner, on GB News. Whether you're listening in your car as you go about your day or you're sat at home with a cup of coffee watching us on the telly, we've got a great show for you. For our final hour, here is what we've got coming up. It's day 2 of the Tory party conference, and the government has announced that they are scrapping proposals to cut the 45p top rate of income tax. The Chancellor is due to give a speech after the backlash over his mini-budget, and I do not know how he's going to style that out. We're going to also be speaking to a doctor who was called up to fight in the Ukraine war by the Russian government, despite being female. She's now fled to Kazakhstan and is seeking asylum, but she's going to be talking to us exclusively. Finally, 9 in 10 teachers could back strike action before Christmas, forcing schools to shut across England over pay disputes. This could cause severe disruption for students who have already had prolonged periods away from school during the pandemic. I had a little rant at the top of the show at 10 o'clock about the way we treat children in this country. If you want to have a look at that, go onto YouTube or onto the GB News social media sites on Instagram and see what I had to say, because I'm going to be talking to somebody about it in a little while as well. We've got all of that coming up and much more across the programme. Keep your views coming, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Right, if you're just tuning in, the government has made a spectacular U-turn over the proposal to abolish the top rate tax cut after a growing backlash over Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget. Are you still with us? The Chancellor said the decision to cut tax for people on incomes of £150,000 or more has become a, quote, distraction from our overriding mission to tackle the challenges facing our country. Just such a strange thing to say. Kwarteng will give a much-anticipated speech at the Conservative Party conference today, addressing the fallout from his budget announcement last week. So let us speak to a man who always makes me feel a little bit, if not a little calmer, at least a little bit more in the picture about what's going on. It's our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, to look at this more. Morning, Liam. First of all, how is it up there at the Tory Party conference? Is everybody in a joyful and buoyant mood, or is there a little bit of kind of awkwardness about the fact that they've U-turned on this so quickly?
Bev, you say all the right things. It's nice to see and hear you too. Here at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, it's a bit like the Labour Party conference last week. The politics is absolutely dominated by economics and financial markets. Last week it was all about a plunging pound and spiking borrowing costs, people concerned about their mortgage. This morning it's all about the fact that the pound has surged from about $1.11 to $1.12 on the reversal of that top rate of tax. There's a sense here among the party faithful. I've been at fringe meetings this morning, meetings of activists talking about policies on the edge of the conference. There's a sense that if only they hadn't mentioned they were going to cut the top rate of tax from 45 to 40%, it would have been so much easier. You know, a 40% top rate of tax, Bev, it is not a radical policy. It was 40% the top rate of tax throughout Tony Blair's entire government and most of Gordon Brown's government during those new Labour years. But it's become a very radical and extreme policy in the eyes of many people because the government has now been forced to U-turn away from it. There's a blame game going on now at the top of the Conservative Party. Prime Minister Liz Truss has mentioned in passing in interviews over the weekend, this was Kwasi Kwarteng's idea. The Treasury, where Kwasi Kwarteng is, they're now letting it be known that a Chief Secretary to the Treasury, a young MP called Chris Philp, very smart guy, a newcomer to the top of politics, he came up with a paper before the mini-budget suggesting that this is a policy they could do. It's not a radical policy, it's not even a big policy in terms of the implications for government revenue. Less than £2 billion out of revenues of £900 billion. And yet it's become a litmus test for fiscal turmoil. And the fact is, Bev, Liz Truss wasn't going to get this top rate of tax cut through Parliament, so she's been forced to turn away.
Ah, I see. OK, that explains things a little more. What do you think about the relationship between the two of them, then, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng? This is getting off to the most terrible start. I thought they had been good mates since university.
They have been good mates. They came into Parliament at the same time in 2010. They are close ideologically. They've written books and pamphlets together in the past. And they're trying to make the best of this, of course. I don't think there's any chance that she's going to sack her Chancellor. But I do think this is obviously a real test of grown-up politics and the difficulties of it. But beyond the personalities, beyond the political psychodrama, what does this really mean for ordinary people? A lot of people have got mortgages on variable rates or they're at fixed rates that are going to end soon. The fact is that interest rates are going up anyway. They're going up around the world. The fact is that currencies everywhere are losing ground against the dollar, and so countries are being forced to defend their currencies, as the Bank of England did last week. It's happening in South Korea, it's happening in Japan and lots of other countries. But the reality is interest rates are going up, and interest rates on the money markets, which decide where mortgage rates are going to be, Bev, they were just over 3% before the mini budget, and they spiked up to about 4.5%, and now they're back down to about 4%. So the reality is that interest rates are going up. I think this mini budget was just the spark of that rise in interest rates rather than the underlying cause, because the underlying cause is a huge long-term global trend away from the ultra-low interest rates that we've had for many years since the aftermath of the global financial crisis. So most of this can't really be lay at the door of government, but I have to say, I don't think ministers have been particularly good at explaining what's happening and why.
What time do we think Kwasi Kwarteng's going to speak today, Liam, and what do you expect him to say? What can he say?
Well, it'll be during the afternoon. I think there'll be a lot of contrition. You know, don't get me wrong, Kwasi Kwarteng is a really experienced, clever politician. He's academically extremely distinguished. He's written, very well-received history books. He's a very bright man, and he gets politics. I think what's happened here is that he, the Prime Minister, other ministers, they overreached themselves, the kind of excitement of getting into office. It's the pinnacle, obviously, of their careers, what they've been wanting to do all their lives. It takes a lot to get to Downing Street, and they overreached with this top rate of tax cut, even though on paper, per se, it's a completely reasonable policy, which will actually probably make the Treasury money. It won't cost money, it will make the Treasury money, because if you lower the top rate of tax, there's more entrepreneurialism and more people do more things in the UK, and it attracts investment. But he's not going to be making those arguments today. It's going to be all about contrition, and it's going to be about trying to move the conversation on to the plan for growth, towards the supply side policies, to the other tax cuts that the Truss government is bringing in, that everybody agrees with, that Labour agrees with, the cut in the national insurance increase that Rishi Sunak implemented, the freezing of corporation tax for 19 rather than taking it to 25%, which many small businesses, including small business owners here, will cheer. They'll try and move the narrative on, and they may well succeed depending on the financial markets. But even if they do move it on, this will go down on their record in the history books as a pretty rocky start.
It will. Liam, thank you so much. Liam Halligan there at the Conservative Party conference. We'll be hearing lots more from Liam as the day goes on, and no doubt he will offer the very best analysis of what Kwasi Kwarteng says this afternoon, so stay here with GB News. I want to talk about this a little bit further now with a former Downing Street advisor and political commentator, Sean Worth. Good morning, Sean. I think you're at the Conservative Party conference. Looks like you're still in your very nice hotel room. You've not quite made it down there to the atmosphere. What do you expect? This is a dreadful start, isn't it? As I said before, just to start a conference like this, having to be on the back foot straight away, having to defend yourself, having to defend a U-turn at such short period of time, it couldn't be worse, could it?
No, it's absolutely humiliating. I'm in hotel. I'm out and about at conference there, and obviously, as you can imagine, everyone is talking about this. But I think the big calculation that they've made is obviously that it was a complete disaster, as everyone has seen. But the big thing was that it was front and centre of the Labour Party campaign to win the next general election. So they were forced to come back and not do that, because you imagine, the centrepiece of Labour conference, even Keir Starmer was, we will reverse this Tory tax break for the super rich and give it to nurses and doctors and the NHS. It's just, the politics just writes itself. So they've had to climb down. Is incredibly humiliating. It looks absolutely ridiculous, but ultimately it'll be the right thing to do on the doorstep for the next election.
You're a former Downing Street advisor, Sean. If Liz Truss had rung you at the end of last week and she'd said, look, I've got this, we've got ourselves into a mess with this, how do we handle it? What would you have said?
I'd have said exactly what they've done, actually. I just said, look, don't worry about it. You just climb down, just do it. U-turns are really politically humiliating, and no one likes to do them. But the evidence is that when you do show some contrition and say, okay, look, this policy is deeply unpopular or stupid, doing a U-turn on it is actually a lot better than digging your heels in and just carrying on as they were trying to do over the last week. So yeah, I'd have said perhaps do it a bit quicker. And if I had the luxury, I'd say don't do it at all.
But why did they do it then? Who are they lacking in that building to say to them, this is going to look really bad, even if it balances the books, and even if you need to, it isn't going to cost you that much in terms of our tax revenue. It's going to play out terribly with the British public, whilst we can barely afford to pay our petrol bills, our fuel bills, whilst we can barely do a supermarket shop with the prices going. Are they that detached from reality? They've got nobody in the building to say, well, hang on a minute, this looks terrible.
Well, I think you've put your finger on something really important there. I mean, all Conservative Prime Ministers since Cameron really have had this strange thing where they want Downing Street to be slimmed down, not cost too much, because they're worried that, a story will appear on, page 11 of The Guardian or the Daily Mirror or something saying, oh, look, they've busted in all these really expensive political advisors. The cost of not having decent people around is that you make catastrophically stupid decisions. And I hope that Liz Truss's team, and I'm friends with them, I'm sorry if they're listening and they're offended by this, but, you can't have 20-somethings from think tanks running like serious political operations. It doesn't work. And it would be really costly to get somebody on with a serious financial brain to help you will cost you £100,000 a year, because that will be a pay cut for them. But you have to do it. You have to get serious people in, and none of them do. And they think it's saving them some embarrassment on, as I say, in page 25 of the Mirror or something. But the long term, the benefit would be huge. And I wish that they would just ditch this and get back to like the Thatcher and Blair years, where they just bust tons of political advisors in, and they didn't care how much they cost because they knew the benefit of it.
Yeah, it feels like there's no adults in the room. Sean Worth, thank you. You can go and get your trousers out of the Kirby trouser press now and put them on and head off down to the conference. So thank you very much from your hotel room there. Former Downing Street advisor and political commentator, Sean Worth. Now, as the Tories face a backlash over the mini-budget, the polls aren't looking great. Surprise, surprise. The latest YouGov vote intention poll shows the Labour Party on 54% of the vote, up 9 points on their previous record high. The Conservatives have dropped to 21%, down by 7 points. So let's consider this with American pollster and pundit Frank Luntz. Hello, Frank. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us there from the conference. You do polls, political polls all around the world. You are an expert in every country that we can think of. How are the Conservatives doing at this stage with this new PM only in office for 5 minutes?
Well, the warning is that what goes up can also come down. And the fact that you saw almost a 20-point shift in a matter of 10 days can go in the other direction as well. What I'm focused on is what happens over the next 36, 48 hours, 72 hours. Does the party have the ability to pay attention, to shift their messaging? In the end, this is about explaining, informing, and in the end, educating. And for example, calling it supply-side economics, why do you do that? Why do you use a term that the rest of the country doesn't know? I asked MPs last night in some of the drinks, how do they explain supply side? And their answer is, I don't know. And that's what the leadership needs to hear from this conference. It is not necessarily the policies that the public's turned against. What it is that they simply don't understand them.
That's interesting. So we've heard this a few times, actually, in the last couple of weeks. I was hosting the evening show all last week, and lots of our panellists were saying that, actually, the Conservatives have got a problem with communication. They've got a problem with how they get these messages out to people. This U-turn now appears to be a reaction to the way that the predominantly left-wing media in this country looked at Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget. They tore it to pieces, and also a lot of the backbenchers did as well. But in that situation, what would you advise, Frank, they do to keep a very firm hand on the political tiller? Do you just say, I'm going to stick with this, or do you capitulate like they've done?
You don't do either of those, and that is the way that the establishment looks at communication. Number one, you have to empathize. You have to demonstrate to people that you understand the challenges of their day-to-day life, that you understand the pressures of inflation, and by the way, it's cost, not inflation, or affordability or cost of living. Second is that they expect a detailed plan of action, not a manifesto, and not something that changes based on the political winds. Third is that you have to personalize, humanize, and individualize so that people see the difference, so that they understand what it means to them. Fourth is that you have to give them some factual information. In the end, this is not just about communication. In the end, it is about specific policies that will have specific results. And fifth is that they need to see the future. They need to see how things will be 6 months from now and 6 years from now. And I haven't heard that yet. I don't think this government is in trouble at all if it makes those changes. And if it doesn't make those changes, then this is a sign of things to come.
So true. And Kwasi Kwarteng was doing an interview today in which he was pressed repeatedly to say when he thought this growth that he's planning for would begin. When might we see those improvements in the bottom line? He couldn't even begin to ballpark that figure. And that, for me, sounded a bit like somebody with a business plan going to the bank and asking for more money, but not giving you any idea of when you might go into profit. Is that the kind of thing you mean, that he's not putting any flesh on the bones of these platitudes?
That's exactly what it is. We have to know it's not enough to make plans for the future or policies for the future. The public wants to know how it's going to impact them individually, personally, their families, day to day. One of the things that I don't understand is they had the time. They knew the challenges they were facing. And I thought that they would be much more explicit and much more personal and visual and impactful in their messaging. But in the end, they chose a traditional rollout. And I'm not sure if I would have done it that way, and we can see the consequences of it now. But I want to emphasize, there are a lot of people who are trying to dismiss the Conservatives' hopes, to say that the election is already over. Just as things can, frankly, go to hell, they can come back. And in the end, it's not just what you think of the conservative approach, it's what you think of the comparison between conservatives and Labour and Lib Dem. And it is in that comparison that conservatives have the best opportunity for success.
OK, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you. Frank Luntz there, political commentator and pollster. Now, after the break, the war in Ukraine continues. More Russians are attempting to flee in fear that they will be called up to fight. We're going to be speaking to one woman who was called up. She will tell us where she is now and what the future looks like for her immediately. But first of all, here is the weather.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good morning. It is 11:27 on Monday morning. You are listening to and watching Bev Turner on GB News, live on your TV, online and radio this morning. Now, it's easy to forget, but the war in Ukraine continues, and Ukraine is pushing to regain its territories with some success in the cities of Lyman and Kherson. Russians are fleeing in fear of being called up to fight. One of them, Dr. Olesya Yakhno, who fled Russia after being called up to fight, has agreed actually to talk to us now. Despite being a woman, Dr. Yakhno was seen as a valuable asset as she had medical experience. So good morning, Olesya. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us what happened. How did this all unravel for you? How does it work when you get the call or the letter to say you need to go and fight in Ukraine? What happened?
Okay, actually I'm against split separation from the February. I'm sorry for my English, firstly. And it was a red line for me when I understand, okay, that's all. But when our government said about mobilization, I have to go to the Arbat Street, where was a protest. Officially, I have to go to see the Tsoi Wall, which mean the perestroika and changes in our country in the past. So I was arrested by police, and in police office was a military commissar, which gave me the summon to go to the war. So I was against war, and now I'm also against the war. So I doesn't know what I should to do, and I didn't know what I should to do because I'm a doctor. I don't will not kill people. My job, my work is to cure them and care them. But I don't want to be connected with this war, so I have to go to the Central Asia, where I will not arrested by Russian police.
What did the Russian people think was happening in Ukraine from February to the present day? Were clear messages getting to the Russian people about the war and the conflict?
Did you read the Orwell? 1984?
Yes, 1984, George Orwell.
Yes, it's very similar with Russian society. Now, unfortunately, our government not named this war as war. It's called by special operation. They not call this mobilization. They call it частичная, a part, little mobilization. I can't very good translate it. So people long time was very calmed because they don't feel the war in their family, in their houses. But now, after mobilization, people is panic because some of them friends, relatives was go to the army and they get summoned.
Okay, don't go anywhere, Alessia. I want to bring in Danny Armstrong, our
thank
Russian
you.
expert here, who I believe that you know. It's very hard for us in the West here, Danny, to imagine being in a country where we aren't clear about military action going on just over the border. Just explain to us in terms of the propaganda. As Alessia was saying then, they were calling it a military operation, not a war.
Yeah, the special military operation is the official term issued by the Kremlin when this invasion was announced. And of course, as we see, it's not a special operation, it's a war, it's an invasion. Those of Alessia's generation, those who have access to different news outlets, of course, independent media has been pretty much silenced in Russia, but those with access to foreign channels and to social media are reading kind of different reports and weighing it up for themselves. There is an older generation that put a lot of pressure. I do believe that even Alessia's parents were in favour of going to the war to help, not to kill people, I must stress, as she is a doctor. Now, being a doctor, her profession actually qualifies her to be sent to Ukraine as a medic, and it goes against President Putin's message of saying that, look, we're just calling up reservists, we're calling up those 3,000, mobilising those 300,000 troops, when actually they're taking people off the streets and sending them there, like Alessia.
Alessia, if I can come back to you, where are you now? How long will you stay away from home? What is your legal position even?
Now I'm in Central Asia. I'm sorry, I will not tell which country, because I can be возвращена back to Russia if I will be, if police will make a criminal punishment for me. So, sorry. Here now I am illegal, but I think I will go to the other country next time, because now I want to find a job for a distance, because I have to earn money.
And so other young people that you know, Russian people, men and women, who have been called up to fight, have they gone, or have they done like you and escaped?
Yes, many people now are gone from the Russia to Central Asia, to the Georgia, to Armenia, because they don't want to participate in this conflict. They don't want to kill people, and they can. It's the only one way to escape from this situation. It's immigration.
Well, listen, we wish you lots of luck, and thank you so much for getting in touch with us. We would love to speak to you again to see how you get on as this situation develops. Thank you so much, Dr. Alessia Yachno there, who was called up to fight for Russia in Ukraine and has obviously fled the country. Danny Armstrong, I want to talk to you some more, but I think we've run out of time, but I'm going to get you back on at some point later this week. Now, after the break, 9 in 10 teachers could strike before Christmas over pay, which could lead to schools shutting down across the UK. Oh, just don't even get me started. But first of all, here's today's news.
It's 11:35. Good morning. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The new Chancellor's abandoned plans to scrap the top rate of income tax for the highest earners. Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have admitted the plan to abolish the 45p tax rate, only made public 10 days ago, has become a distraction from their mission to grow the economy. After a tumultuous week in the markets and intervention from the Bank of England, the Prime Minister and Chancellor say, "We get it and we've listened." The Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Chris Philp, told us that the 45p tax cut was just a small part of a huge package of measures.
The government is a government that listens. It's taken the temperature, and it's, we are a democracy, and we're a parliamentary democracy. So listening both to the public and, of course, to members of parliament is very important. That's what they've done. This had become a distraction from what is a really good plan. There are many bits of this plan that haven't even been reported in the last week and a half.
Well, the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, says so much damage, though, has already been done.
It was obvious they weren't going to get this through the House of Commons. They were forced into this screeching U-turn. But so much damage has already been done, with higher government borrowing costs and huge worries for people about how they're going to afford their mortgages.
The pound's bounced back to levels seen before the announcement of that mini-budget 10 days ago. Sterling surged during overnight trading as reports emerged of the Chancellor's plans for a U-turn. The pound hit $1.13 at one stage, but has since dipped again to 1.12. Almost £150 million will be taken off customers' water bills after 11 water companies received financial penalties. The water regulator Ofwat says utility companies that have been fined for missing targets. Thames Water and Southern Water performed the worst. They'll have to return almost £80 million to their clients. Hundreds of residents in Dunfermline in Fife have gathered to welcome the King and Queen consort. Well, the pair are visiting to mark the former town gaining city status. Dunfermline is one of 8 places that won that status as part of the Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee celebrations. TV, online, and we're on your DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it's 11:39. You are listening to and watching GB News, the best news channel on your TV here and also on your DAB radio. Now, let's head back to Birmingham and to the Conservative Party conference. We're going to talk now to Victoria Prentice, the Minister of State at the Department of Work and Pensions. Good morning, Victoria. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning to you.
Good morning. It's not a great start, is it, to have to be defending this U-turn so early on? How easy are MPs finding it to style this out? It's a little bit awkward.
Well, I said yesterday, but before this change in policy, that everybody in this conference centre wants tax cuts. Of course we do. We're Conservatives. We believe that people should keep more of their own money and make their own decisions. So I also said yesterday that it was a live conversation, which taxes are cut and when and how we manage that. And I view this as part of that conversation. I think it's sensible. This was becoming a real distraction from the good news in the rest of the mini budget, a lot of which hasn't been talked about because of this particular measure.
Which is ironic, because now you have nothing but a distraction, because the U-turn is now all we're talking about. In terms of a distraction, this has eclipsed any negativity you might have had from a rather left-leaning media in the last few days.
Well, with respect, I think the way we govern the country is about more than the media, if you don't mind me saying so. I think it's important that we get policy.
It's been because of the media. He said we've listened to people. Surely he means we've seen the headlines.
No, I don't think that at all. He's been visiting businesses. I've just come from 2 really useful roundtables with business leaders. I think it's important, particularly as constituency MPs, that we listen to the voices of our constituents. It was definitely distracting people from the good news in the mini budget. So the good news that the government's going to be helping them with their energy costs, and also that there will be a tax cut for everybody. So without the national insurance rises, people on average incomes will be significantly better off next year, and that's definitely good news for the working population. I think we need to concentrate a bit less, as the Prime Minister said on the media yesterday, about the optics and a bit more on the policy, and that's what we're very focused on doing at the moment.
And yet, this U-turn was because of the optics. Do you see what's happening? Liz Truss says one thing, Kwasi Kwarteng says another, and we're left in the middle not knowing who's in charge and who is realistically going to be a trustworthy and robust leader.
Well, I'm not sure that it was because of the optics. I think it was because MPs talked to their constituents, listened to their constituents, fed in properly to government policy making, and said that this was becoming a distraction. I'm glad that we've made that decision and that we can now move on with getting out the good news, if the media allow us to talk about it, about the other really good points in the fiscal event that we had. And I've been talking all morning about growth and about how we get people into employment. We've got a really tight labour market, in many ways a nice problem to have. It means we've got very low unemployment, but we need to get people back into the labour market in many cases, and I've been talking about the ways that we do that. I'd rather focus on the positive news of our growth agenda.
Okay, and when pressed this morning, Kwasi Kwarteng couldn't give any response to when that growth might start to be seen in British bank accounts, in our businesses, in our revenue, in our shops. Do you have any idea, Victoria Prentice, when we might start to see this turnaround?
Well, the bit that I'm delivering, so this is, it's my job to get more people into our very tight labour market. I've just been talking to companies, as I said, about ways in which we do that. And these aren't legislative ways that take time. These are very practical ways. These are things like carrying on with the Kickstart programme in new pools of people that we need to get into work. So the Restart programme, focusing on people who are a bit older, getting them back into employment or keeping them in employment, making sure that we have grown-up conversations with people about what sort of pension they want to have when they leave employment, and that will help them to make decisions about when they retire and what sort of hours they should do. These are things that we're doing right now, and I think that that's right and very much part of the growth agenda.
I couldn't disagree with you there. Sorting out our labour market is a huge consideration. So good luck, Victoria Prentice, Minister of State at the Department for Work and Pensions. My advice would be, when you make a decision, stick with it, even if it doesn't seem terribly popular, at least for more than a few days. Right, now, a 34-year-old man has appeared at Liverpool Magistrates Court charged with that shocking murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, and the case has been sent to Liverpool Crown Court, where it will be heard later today. Our North West of England reporter, Sophie Reaper, was in court, and she can tell us more. Good morning, Sophie.
Good morning. Well, we've heard from Magistrates Court this morning about the 2 men who've been charged in relation to the Olivia Pratt-Corbell murder. Last Thursday, we heard that a 34-year-old from West Derby had been arrested on suspicion of Olivia's murder. And then over the weekend, Crown Prosecution Service confirmed that Thomas Cashman had been charged with the murder. He's also been charged with the attempted murder of convicted burglar Joseph Nee and of Olivia's mother, Cheryl, who was present for the first hearing and looked visibly upset throughout. He's also been charged with 2 counts of possession of a firearm. Now, as you said, the hearing has been passed over now to Liverpool Crown Court, where Thomas Cashman will appear at around 2 p.m. this afternoon for that to continue. Now, the other man who's been charged in relation to Olivia's murder is 40-year-old Paul Russell. Now, he's been charged with assisting an offender. He drove Thomas Cashman away from the scene of the crime, as well as disposing of Cashman's clothing that he had on throughout the incident. Now, the defence for Paul Russell made no application for bail, and as a result, he will remain in custody until his trial, which has been set for the 31st of October.
Okay, Sophie, thank you very much. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper there, bringing us up to date on that case. Now, 9 in 10 teachers could back strike action before Christmas, forcing schools to shut across England over pay disputes. Teachers are demanding a pay rise to their salary after the Department of Education informed them that most would receive a 5% rise, rising to 8.9% for newly qualified staff. These strikes will, of course, pour more misery on parents whose children were consistently forced to miss long periods of school during the pandemic. Let's speak now to Chris McGovern for the Campaign for Real Education. Good morning, Chris. Thank you for joining us. Sometimes it feels like teachers don't really care about students and their educational well-being anymore. Is that just me?
That's probably just you, because most teachers are pretty dedicated. I taught for 35 years. There are some wonderfully dedicated teachers, but as in all walks of life, there are some people who actually aren't doing a very good job and perhaps don't care very much and are more interested in taking political action. So it's a mixture, of course. But look, I'm a teacher. I taught for all those years. I sat on the TUC. So I admire many of my teachers, my teaching colleagues. But yes, there are always some bad apples in the pot. And certainly there are a few with regard to what's coming our way very shortly.
Tell me about the conversations which are had then behind closed doors to decide whether these strikes go ahead. In terms of the benefits to the teachers, the risk to children's education, who is having those conversations?
Well, it tends to be activists. So what you tend to get are, you've got one big union, the National Education Union, then you've got the National Association of School Teachers, and you've got other unions as well, head teachers' unions. And they will talk, they're the activists, they will talk, and they will then try to encourage other members of staff to go on strike. You have to remember, though, and it's often forgotten and perhaps not known at all, that the majority of staff in schools are not teachers. That's government's own statistics. So when we're talking about action in schools, you have to say, well, actually, it's a minority of staff in school who actually vote for strike, even a minority of teachers often. But look, there's a lot of pressure on the teaching profession at the moment. And of course, I have some sympathy for teachers, just as I have sympathy for nurses. I have rather more sympathy, though, for young people, particularly for those children like my own grandchildren who are just starting nursery and primary school. They're going to be really badly affected by this. And after this COVID lockdown, things could hardly be worse for our kids. And, really, education is not going to get much coverage in these party conferences. We talk about politics, we talk about money, we talk about budget and prime ministers. What really matters to this country is our future. And it takes about, 30 years to change things in education? So if you want to understand why we're in the mess we're in today economically, go back 30 years, read our campaign newsletters, and we were setting it out then. It was all going off the rails then. We've got to put our education system right. We don't have the skilled workers and the educated workers. We're fooling ourselves. Politicians aren't interested. All they're interested in is next week or even tomorrow. Not interested in 30 years' time. But we've got to do something about this. Many teachers understand that. And we do need to pay teachers more. And we can do it because actually the amount of money spent on education is very high in this country. But we have too many staff who are not teachers. So we need to cut back on the non-teaching staff, give more money to the teachers. It's a bit like the health service. Pay the people on the front line. They do need to be encouraged to come into the profession.
But So I'm just trying to think who you mean then. Who's working in schools being paid handsomely and not teaching our kids? Are you talking about receptionists, nurses, caretakers? Who do you mean?
Well, if you go into any primary school in the country, you will find that most classes there are at least one, sometimes two classroom assistants. This allows the teacher not to be at the front of the class. It allows the children to sit around tables, half of them with their backs to the teacher. This is a method which is only possible because you have classroom assistants. It's a useless method. If you go to China or Singapore or Taiwan or Japan, you'll see one teacher, maybe 70 children. One teacher, very good teacher, teaching them. No classroom assistants. The methods we employ with all these classroom assistants means that we have a method which doesn't really work because it allows it's called child-centered learning, but actually it doesn't work. And what we know, you go to poorer countries such as Vietnam, they're a long way ahead of us. Why are they a long way ahead of us? Because they use good teaching methods. We want good teachers. You need some classroom assistants, of course you do, but actually far, far too many, because we have so many classroom assistants, it allows us to actually use methods which don't work. It's absurd. It costs a lot of money and it doesn't work. So we've got to get rid of half the classroom assistants and give the money to the teachers, get the best people in the profession.
OK, all right, Chris, thank you. Interesting thoughts there. Chris McGovern from the Campaign for Real Education. No doubt we will carry on talking about these strikes as we head into the winter. Right, we're going back to the Tory party conference. Going to talk to Conservative MP for Shrewsbury and Atcham, Daniel Kuczynski. Good morning, Daniel. Are you happy with your party leadership this morning? They've made it all a bit awkward for you, haven't they?
Well, what I would say is that the top 1% of our society already contribute 30% of all taxation collected. And so I was very pleased that this Chancellor had the courage to make that announcement that there would be a reduction in taxation across the board of £45 billion, but £2 billion would be for the top 1%. I have friends from university who have employed tens of thousands of people who have left the United Kingdom to move to Switzerland or Singapore. We know the stories. Some of the brightest, most talented, most entrepreneurial Britons have left this country because of the overtly complex taxation system and the pernicious levels of taxation in comparison to other jurisdictions. This is the first Chancellor who's had the courage to talk about how do we stop running a bankrupt model and how do we increase the number of these people staying in our country or coming to our country from overseas. So I very much regret and I'm very disappointed that the government has changed its mind on that policy.
Well, good for you. Good for you, because you're one of the few MPs that we've heard talking out to say they're disappointed about the U-turn. Do you think more MPs agree with you, but they're just too afraid to say that?
Well, I've come on GB News because, of course, when you go on Newsnight or the BBC, they literally will not tolerate this argument being put forward to the British people. They don't want a debate on this issue. The attitude is, let's tax the rich until the pips squeak. Let's extract as much tax out of them as possible without any cognizance as to why it is that the United Kingdom has been borrowing industrial levels of borrowing over the last 3 decades and why we cannot live within our means. I will defend this policy because it's a Conservative policy and it recognises that in a highly competitive global world where there are few loyalties now to individual sovereign nations and where big business moves and looks for the jurisdiction with the lowest taxation, that we need to be competitive. And in the post-Brexit context, when we are responsible for the first time in my lifetime for the taxation and regulatory framework within the United Kingdom, we have an opportunity to create the right set of circumstances for these entrepreneurs. I'm not going to fall into the trap, like so many socialists do, of denigrating the top 1% or just seeing them as a cash cow to be shaken vigorously to extract money out of them. I see them as a very, very special group of men and women who have got the raw talents to create wealth, and I want to expand the pool of these people in the United Kingdom. I very much hope that Kwasi and Liz in the future will show the courage and resilience to explain this to the British people, rather than allowing the BBC, trade unions and others to denigrate that very, very effective practical policy which would have seen increased prosperity for the United Kingdom.
Yeah, well, the fact that they U-turned based on the idea, that the notion they listened to people, although being a bit vague about who those people were, and did a U-turn, I find quite terrifying. But Daniel Kaczynski, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Right, I'm done for today. I will be back tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. We've got our team up in Birmingham. We've got Mark Longworth on the other side of the studio, so I will hand it over to them now, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye for now.
Hello, I'm Alex Deacon with your latest weather update. Dry and a bright day for most today. There is thicker cloud across western Scotland and Northern Ireland, where there will be some rain at times. That's being created by this little weather feature, this tangle of weather fronts, but taking a glancing blow towards this area of high pressure, which will continue to dominate for most, and hence why most places are going to have a fine, bright day. There's a fair bit of cloud around, but we're seeing some sunny spells over northeastern Scotland, central and eastern parts of England, much of Wales too. But that thicker cloud still bringing a little bit of rain through the afternoon over the west coast of Scotland, perhaps staying a little drier in northern parts of Northern Ireland. Temperature-wise, well, above average for the time of year, most places in the mid to high teens, bit of sunshine across East Anglia. Could see temperatures close to 20 degrees. The rain is going to continue across western Scotland, could cause a few issues, certainly a lot of spray and surface water on the roads here as that rain continues through the night, and we'll see the rain returning to Northern Ireland overnight as well and spreading towards Glasgow. Elsewhere, by the odd shout, most places across England and Wales having a dry night and a pretty mild night too. On to Tuesday, and that rain at first across much of Scotland, but the western coast of Scotland should at least turn drier quite quickly through the day. It'll take a while before that rain clears away from Belfast and from the central belt of Scotland. Quite a damp day for northwest England, and a good part of Wales seeing rain on and off throughout Tuesday. Some of that rain may get to southwest England, but much of the East Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast dry and bright again, and a little warmer as well. We're likely to reach 20 Celsius on Tuesday afternoon. That zone of wetter weather continues to affect a large chunk of the country as we head through Tuesday evening, and it's tied back into a deepening area of low pressure. Now, this needs watching Tuesday night and into